This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the NVRC webinar on the plastic bag tax. My name is Monica Boehringer. I'm the Refuse and Recycling Coordinator for the City of Manassas and the Chair of the Northern Virginia Waste Management Board, and your host for today's webinar. Earlier this year, the 2020 Virginia legislative session, HB 534, they authorized any locality to impose a tax of 5 cents per bag on disposable plastic bags provided to customers by certain retailers, with certain bags being exempt from the tax. Today, we will be taking a closer look at the plastic bag tax to develop a better understanding of what it is and what it means for localities throughout Virginia. A few housekeeping tips before we begin. We are using the GoToMeeting webinar platform. Attendees will be muted during presentations, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions following our speakers' presentations and during our discussion period. We encourage you to use the chat box for any questions that you have for our speakers today. Our first speaker today is Lillian Power. She is the Environmental Protection Specialist for Washington, D.C.'s Watershed Protection Division, Department of Energy and Environment. Lillian.
Yes. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today to talk a little bit about DC's bag law. I am an environmental protection specialist with the Department of Energy and Environment here in DC, and it's my role to basically implement and enforce the 5-cent bag fee here in DC and lead the team that works on that program. Just kind of some background on our, where we're going today with this presentation. So I really plan to kind of cover very general background, implementation and enforcement with some slides also on general impacts of the law. DC's law is over 10 years old, so it was actually the first fee of its kind in the country. So we're lucky in that we have data and experience that we're hoping we can use to inform and prepare you for potential, implementation of very similar legislation in your localities. So with that, I think I'll just dive right in to, let's see if I can use my controls. There we go. Okay. Dive right into just the general background and motivation for DC's law. So as many of you are likely familiar with, right, DC has two waterways, primarily the Potomac and the Anacostia River. And the Anacostia in particular has really historically had issues with pollution. And as you can see, right, the river runs through southeast, northeast DC, and it is really it's a very urban river, right? Its watershed is comprised of DC and large portions of Montgomery County, Maryland, and Prince George's County, Maryland. So it is heavily impacted by the surrounding land use. One of the main issues with pollution historically has been trash. It is a very visual source of pollution, right? It's really easily identifiable, and it really is a result of having over 1 million people in a relatively small watershed, right? Litter, trash is a big issue here, and these are all photos from a few years ago. I would say 5-10 years ago of the river after heavy rain events. We're seeing, as you can see here, right, like bottles, beverage containers, plastic bags, right? We see a lot of trash. So DC became really interested in, fighting this issue and preventing trash as a pollutant, particularly in the Anacostia. So in actually 2008, DOEE actually we funded a survey through the Anacostia Watershed Society to look at the major types of trash. So if we want to address this issue of trash in the river, right, we have to first kind of really identify what those sources are, right, what really the issue is. And what AWS found was that plastic bags were the #1 type of trash found in Anacostia tributaries, and it was in the top 4 in the river itself. And that this was alongside beverage containers, so your like bottles and cans, styrofoam, as well as food wrappers. So it became pretty obvious from this data that plastic bags are an issue and are one of the more prevalent issues when it comes to trash in the Anacostia. So this was really the primary motivation for the bag fee legislation. It was introduced in 2009 and passed in 2009. And you know, the idea with passing a 5-cent fee, I'll go into the details, like the specifics of the law in a little bit, but you know, the primary motivation for the law was to change people's behavior, to raise awareness around the issue of disposable, you know, single-use plastic bags, and also to reduce the number of bags we find in district communities and waterways. I put this slide together here because I wanted to cover some of the general concerns that we heard from different members of the community that, you know, this rule impacted, because these are likely concerns that you could hear in your city, your county, should you pass your fee rule. So I'm going to cover sort of the main concerns here, and then I will point out, like, all of these we very, very specifically we really absorbed, we took seriously, and we adapted our implementation of the rule to, you know, assuage many of these concerns, if not all. So starting with a very common one that you may or very likely will hear is from residents and their representatives, you know, that the fee could have a disproportionate impact on low-income residents, right? A nickel could actually really add up when you're going grocery shopping, right? So this was a very legitimate concern that, you know, we didn't want to have like negative impacts, add additional burden on those members of our community that, you know, this fee could really impact. So that's one piece which I'll kind of address later, how we address that. And then from businesses, it was a lot of, you know, concern about interactions with customers, right? Like that this would lead to kind of increased conflict, that there would be frustrated or angry customers that they'd have to work with and interact with every day. There was also a big concern from restaurants about, you know, at a sit-down restaurant, a patron settles the bill and then afterward asks for a bag for leftovers, and then do they have to completely redo the bill just to add the nickel? And that was a big concern of theirs. And then, you know, we did hear back from the plastics industry, from, you know, lobbyists and their representatives, you know, basically saying that this law isn't going to have the impact you want it to have. Really, the direction you want to take are these kind of positive outreach campaigns, education campaigns, really focus on recycling behavior, littering behavior. You know, requiring this fee isn't going to have that impact. And I will tell you now, you know, we did see the impact. Spoiler alert, we did see the impact we were hoping. And I'll show you a few of those slides down the line. And I will also just, you know, one of our feedback, our main point kind of in response to this is that, like, it doesn't have to be an either or situation. You know, you can combine outreach and education activities with legislation, and, you know, maybe that's actually a more well-rounded approach if you're able to take that approach. So those are kind of some general things that we heard when the law was first proposed. It was unanimously passed. I think it really helped that we had that data from the Anacostia Watershed Society, really showing that plastic bags were an issue in our rivers. So it was passed, and then it went into effect in January of 2010. So basically, what the law requires here in DC is that any retailer that sells food or alcohol, they must charge a 5-cent fee for every paper or plastic disposable bags that they provide to customers. There are some exemptions to this rule. As I mentioned, the restaurant's concerns with providing a doggy bag, the law was actually amended to include an exemption for restaurants providing a doggy bag, a carryout bag, provided it's paper and not plastic. So they don't have to charge businesses that have seating do not have to charge the 5-cent fee if they are providing a paper bag to their customer. Also, those plastic bags that you see in, the produce sections of grocery stores, right? The bulk kind of dry goods sections of grocery stores, like nuts and that kind of thing, where you get plastic bags to carry those out and to package those items. Those are also exempt, as well as, bags used to immediately wrap flowers and newspapers, pet waste, that kind of thing. It's really that point of sale, that disposable paper or plastic bag that is required to charge here. So the law went into effect January of 2010. The first thing that's really important to do when a new law like this is passed is to identify your regulated community, right? Who you need to know who you need to reach out to, the types of businesses that this impacts, how many are you dealing with, because that's going to impact your outreach strategy, and oftentimes like your budget, your bottom line, right? And what we did, and what's pretty convenient here in DC, right, is our Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. We worked with them to pull the billing agent business addresses for any business in DC that has a food or beverage license, right? So your bakery license, food products, grocery stores, delis, that kind of thing. And that ended up being about 4,000 to 5,000 businesses we have here in DC who are regulated. We also identified and reached out to local trade associations that work with food businesses, liquor businesses, right, to work with them and collaborate with them in getting the word out. So one key to success, I would say, in a rule like this, in a law like this, is time for compliance assistance and outreach, right? While the law was in effect in January, we spent the first 11 months of 2010 doing really direct outreach. One big thing that was the key to success and was something that we did to address the concern about the impact on low-income residents was we actually teamed up with CVS to purchase and distribute thousands of reusable bags with a focus on low-income and senior residents here in DC, with the idea being, right, that now those who may not easily be able to afford a reusable bag as an option, right, now they have the ability to make the choice between charging the fee or bringing their own reusable bags. So that was a really successful point, and also was a really great way to partner with one of our biggest distributors of disposable plastic bags and, help promote them in a way that was, that made them feel less like the bad guys and more like they were, part of the positive change that we were working to promote, right, with this law. We also sent mailers to all 4,000 to 5,000 businesses. And in those mailers, we actually included what you see here on the right. This image was a sticker that was included in all the mailers that businesses could put on their countertop or in their window, basically as a way of hoping to alleviate that concern of the conflict between the customer and the cashier. And it's actually been really successful here. Businesses really like it because if a customer comes in, they're upset or they're confused about the 5-cent fee, the cashier, the employee can just point to the sticker and say, this is not our rule, this is DC's rule. If you need more information or want to talk to somebody, there's contact information. There's a website on this sticker, right? So that really was a way of sort of alleviating that concern that businesses had about the day-to-day interactions with customers. We also did a lot of advertisements through radio, newspapers, online media, bus shelters, as well as other educational materials. And I will say, this is an interesting rule because it really impacts the behavior of the business, and it also impacts the behavior of the resident and the customer, right? So those are kind of two different regulated entity types, from the regulatory agency's perspective, and you want to make sure you're getting to both of them for a successful, long-lasting, program. So we started to actually do enforcement in the form of inspections in December of 2010. And really, this was a period of extended compliance assistance. We would go in, we would conduct an inspection, which means like we would buy an item, right? We would see if they charged the fee. We asked for a bag, see if they charged the fee. And then we would talk to the businesses if they were in compliance or if they were out of compliance. So it was a way to further, educate the businesses rather than immediately turn into official warnings and fines. This was an opportunity of extended, really, communication between the program and the businesses. And what we found in that first month, right after 10 months of outreach, 11 months of outreach, that about half of the businesses we inspected were in compliance, half weren't. This is a rule that can take time to really change behavior. So I just want to pinpoint that here as well. So a second piece of the law that's a very important piece here is that, and similar to Virginia's recently passed law, right, is that not only do these businesses need to charge the fee, but they actually need to remit it into a special purpose fund that was created by the Anacostia Cleanup and Protection Act, right? So it's a special purpose fund where all funds must only be used for projects and programs that protect or restore district waterways, right? So here's a few of the examples of the types of, the categories that are allowed, funding from the special purpose fund. And it's actually done so businesses will remit the total amount, on their sales and use tax form. So right here, there's a line item specifically on the sales and use tax form for reporting the total amount of money that they're remitting to the fund. And I'm just going to go back really quickly just to cover some of this. So we actually see at this point in time, I know it says FY17, but it still holds up roughly $200,000 a month we see remitted into the fund. And that adds up to about $2 million, a little over $2 million in bag fees are remitted every year. So you can see here, right, we've got from the beginning of the creation of the fund on, a steady increase until it kind of stabilizes, around 2016 on. And that money funds, as I said, a variety of different projects, right? We have installed 7 trash traps in district tributaries along the Anacostia primarily that help capture and remove trash before it makes its way into the river itself. Stream restoration work, our Anacostia River Explorers program provides free boat tours to any district resident, school group, organization here in the city, really to promote that interaction and build relationships with people and the river. We've educated thousands of students with watershed education and meaningful experiences and service projects as a result. There's a lot of different projects that have been funded as a result of this special purpose fund. So diving into enforcement here. So DC is actually, I would say it's pretty unique in our enforcement program. We actually have a team, myself and 4 other people are actually inspectors that go out and ensure businesses are complying with the law. We inspect at least 550 businesses every year. And we actually have a really structured approach to our inspection process. As you can see right here's a map of DC, and DC is divided into 8 different wards, and those wards are further divvied up into neighborhoods that are called advisory neighborhood commissions, right, ANCs. And we actually visit each ANC a very specific number of times every year, and the number of times we visit an ANC is based on the proportion of regulated businesses that reside within that ANC. So, for example, the city center, right, like our commercial and financial kind of business district hub is primarily in Ward 2, right, and Ward 1. That's really where we have 50% of our regulated businesses are in Wards 1 and 2. So we spend a lot of time inspecting businesses in Wards 1 and 2. About 50% of our inspections are in Wards 1 and 2. And the idea here is that we're not, either through, if we just did random inspections, we may be favoring or over inspecting one ANC over another, and we wanted to make sure that we were approaching inspections in a way that was as fair to businesses as possible. We also, beyond our quota system of 550 businesses per year, we also take tips from the public from our 311 app, our website, through calls and emails, and in person. And we typically try to follow up those tips with an inspection if we can. So the way DC deals with enforcement, if we find a business to be out of compliance, the first thing we do if we encounter a business where this is their very first violation, we usually issue what we call a notice of violation, which is basically an official warning letter that's sent out to the business, letting them know that they failed to properly charge the fee and that they need to come into compliance to avoid further fines. If a business continues to be out of compliance and failing to properly charge the fee, then we start to issue fines starting at $100 that can double up to $800. And the fine amount is based on reviewing a 3-year history of that business. So fines can get fairly high, up to $800 based on, the number of times that business has been out of compliance over a 3-year period. And what we see, compliance rates, the fact that we do have this really built out enforcement program is really fantastic, because it's one of the data points that we can use to measure success of the law. Are businesses complying, right? And what we see is a pretty steady uptick. FY11 was 40%, but we saw it rise steadily 1 year over the next, up to 77% in FY19. So what I tend to see here is that we're stabilizing out in the 70s percentile, and what that tells us, is that businesses have adapted and they have, it's become their new normal. So with impacts of the law, I wanted to kind of end on general impacts. As I stated in the beginning, the point of this fee was, one, to raise awareness, about the issue of plastic bags as a pollutant, right? As a piece of a type of litter that, that we struggle with in our communities, but also in our rivers, to change people's behavior, to sort of make them more aware of the number of plastic bags that they're using, and hopefully minimize the number that they're using, so that point 3, right, we see fewer plastic bags in the river. So 10 years down the line, right, are we seeing the impacts that we had hoped that we would see? And the first thing I'll sort of start off with, one, I would say the compliance rate is kind of an example, one point that we use as a measure of success. And then beyond that, when it comes to the special purpose fund, the Anacostia Cleanup and Protection Fund, we have generated over $19 million. I think at this point it's up to like over $21 million in revenue. And that money has been used for many different programs that absolutely have helped in protecting and restoring our waterways. And these are just a few examples here on this slide. Over 70,000 pounds of trash have been removed as a result of our trash trap installations. We've restored almost, like, I think at this point, over 30,000 linear feet of streams. We've gotten over 8,000 people to experience the river on our boat tours. And, you know, homeowners, we've seen over 3,000 trees installed, 2,300 rain barrels. So this is absolutely a testament to the impact, the positive impact the law and the fee has had on our waterways here in DC. When it comes to the question of, are we seeing fewer plastic bags? We do have some points there as well. So we work closely with the Alice Ferguson Foundation and other local nonprofit groups. Alice Ferguson Foundation will probably be, if they already haven't, I'm sure they have, you know, been very active with Virginia's legislation because they're based out of Virginia. And what they have done is they've tracked the number of plastic bags they see at cleanups. And what they saw is cleanups conducted in the district, starting in 2010 when the law was passed, they saw a steady, basically a decrease in the number of plastic bags at cleanup events per volunteer, right? So that definitely attests to the impact on the environment the rule has had, the law has had. And then in general, we were curious, you know, a few years after the law was passed, what are people feeling about the law? Is it having the impact on behavior that we were hoping it would have? And we commissioned a study in 2013 through Opinion Works that basically surveyed residents and businesses about their feelings about the law, whether it's had any impact. And I'm just going to highlight a few of the metrics that sort of came out of that survey. And one big one that we highlight is that residents are reporting using 80% fewer bags, right, after the fee went into effect. And then businesses reported a 50% reduction in the number of bags that they've purchased, which, you know, can be translated to, if they're purchasing fewer bags, then they're very likely distributing fewer bags as well. And I haven't included it here, but they also reported I think it was 75 to 80% of businesses either felt positive about the law or neutral at worst, right? So, you know, while there were concerns from businesses and residents at the time, all of our data really at this point, 10 years down the road, has shown that it has really been ingrained into DC culture, and people really accept it as the norm. It's not something that, you know, really has the same concern that they did 10 years ago when the bill was first proposed. So I'm going to just end here on some general lessons learned, and, you know, hopefully this is helpful for you when thinking about how a plan for implementing a fee in your locality. And I will say, so my team, we implement the bag fee, but we also implement DC's foam ban, our plastic straw ban, recyclable, compostable food service board requirements. There's several laws that we work on. And this is really, these are lessons learned based on our experience with all of those programs. But one big thing that is a key to success, right, is a carefully tailored and planned outreach campaign. Outreach and education is the baseline, is the basis for success for a law like this. We usually like to give businesses at least a year, and by year I would say the clock starts at earliest when the law is officially passed, between basically when the law is passed and when we start actively enforcing. We give businesses at least a year to make that transition if we can. That's the ideal here. We also build into our campaigns as many opportunities for feedback from the regulated community as possible. So particularly with foam ban, that extended compliance assistance period I mentioned in our bag law outreach, those in-person opportunities to hear back from businesses. What are their points of confusion, their points of concern, what questions do they have, right? I know in this time, right, like in person might not be as feasible, but having webinars with really heavily, Q&A components are also really effective. And this is great for two reasons. One, it helps you fine tune your outreach campaign. You may make, what I have done is make certain assumptions for things that that I think are obvious. And then when talking to businesses, I realize I'm getting the same question about the same point of confusion from several businesses. So I need to update my outreach messaging. I need to update my outreach materials to make sure that I'm addressing that point, because clearly it's a point of confusion. And it also really helps to build a relationship with your regulated community. Businesses really appreciate having that opportunity to provide feedback, right? So it's something that really allows for long-term success of your program. I will also say accessibility, right, is really important. We always translate all of our major outreach materials into the 6 most common non-English, right, languages here in DC. We also include on the back of all of our flyers, if we're handing them out, there's a little blurb on the back of the flyer that has for translation services, call X number in the 6 most commonly used languages outside of English in DC. And the number in that blurb is my direct number. So they can call me and I can use DOEE's translation services to then speak to the business owner or employee. I would also say clear messaging. I know this seems sort of obvious, but many businesses will be super enthused about this change. They're excited about it. At worst, what we found is businesses just want to know what they need to do and when they need to do it by, right? So those two pieces, just make sure it's as clear and direct as possible, right? What is the deadline and what is the specific requirement? I will also say one big thing, or it seems like a little thing, but I think is really important, making it as easy to talk to like a real person as possible. As I said, I include my direct phone number on all of our flyers, in all of our websites. So businesses are often really surprised when they call and they get a real person who can just pretty much immediately answer their question, right? And they're really pleased that it's not, not a hassle to try and do the right thing, right? They're trying to come into compliance. Let's make it as easy for them as possible. Then I will say, just here with the fee rule, fees can be sort of tricky, right? You have to think through your long-term plan for success because it's entirely behavior-based on the business side and on the resident side, right? So as you saw in our compliance rate, right, they're around 70, we've kind of steadied off in at 75, 77% compliance. And we don't really expect to ever hit 100% steadily, like over the long run, like we might with our phone ban, because it's all about interacting with that cashier, right? Interacting with that employee. If they're busy or if they're distracted, if they're having a bad day, they may be charging all the time, and then the interaction they had with you is not, they forgot to do it, right? So there is a need with the fee law for pretty habitual reminders, at least every few years, sort of like a celebration of the rule, and, sharing the positive impact it's had and reminding businesses of the requirements. And then just finally, that question of how will you measure impact? The way that our law is set up is businesses just remit the total amount, the total amount of money from a certain set of a period of time. And it's really difficult for us to actually translate that into the number of bags that they're distributing. So we use these relationships with our nonprofit partners. We use our compliance rates sort of as measures of impact instead. So just thinking through that is also really important. And with that, I don't want to take any more time. I'm sorry, I took a little bit longer than I expected, but please write my contact information down if we don't have time, and if you have a question or you want to have a conversation that you think DC can assist or provide some feedback, we'd be happy to do that.
Lillian, thank you. This is Debbie, everybody, from NVRC. I just have a few questions that I hope you can answer quickly. We can answer. One is Lily Crest asked, did you have to hire new FTEs to support this program?
Yes, I will say yes. We had one FTE originally that was 100% dedicated to the bag fee. And I would say that that is also the case in like Montgomery County and other local jurisdictions. You usually have at least one FTE.
Great, thank you. And then Randy Bartlett asked, do you charge non-grocery stores like Home Depot or department stores or 7-Elevens?
Great question. So the rule is triggered if they have a food product of any kind. So if you go into Home Depot and they've got M&Ms at the counter, like when you're checking out, they have to charge for every bag that they distribute. If you go into a clothing store and they've got like snacks at the counter, they have to charge. If Home Depot removed all of its, snacks and water bottles and stuff, then they don't have to charge. It's really that food and beverage.
Great. Jim, excuse me, Jim Price had a couple of questions. One is, did anyone from the industry continue to push back after the law was passed? Was there a pushback due to COVID?
So that's a great question. One thing that I think is a benefit of the fee, particularly in this year, given all the additional, burdens that residents, businesses, everybody is sort of dealing with, is that the fee, rather than a ban, actually allows for flexibility on both the business and the customer side. They can choose to bring reusable bags. Businesses can choose to, allow or not allow reusable bags, that kind of thing. We have not gotten pushback from business, from industry, really, about DC has not suspended our law. We've continued it business as usual, and we have not received any sort of pushback from that.
Great. And then one last question, and we'll move it over to Helen's presentation on the Virginia law. Is DC considering bottle bills or other single-use plastic reduction measures?
That's a great question, and I think we've had a really great run so far with legislation aimed at dealing with the trash, especially from that 2008 study that really did highlight foam, plastic bags, and beverage containers, right, as major points and sources of trash pollution in the river. We are always looking for new and creative ways to address that. So I wouldn't say that, we've got specific plans for a bottle bill coming up, but we are absolutely trying to think through those possible new avenues for addressing the kind of outstanding trash issues that we're still dealing with.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I believe you'll be sticking around so that after Lillian's, we'll have an opportunity for more questions. For Helen's presentation. So Helen, take it away.
Okay, let me just get my screen. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes, it looks great.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, I'll take questions that we also got from the chat in a bit. Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Helen Lee. I am the Environmental Program Manager for the City of Alexandria. I also serve on the policy committees for the NVRC and the VRA, the Virginia Recycling Association, with Debbie and Scott, and we're so excited to speak on this webinar today. Before we start, just quickly, I wanted to have a disclaimer that I'm not an attorney, not giving legal advice. This is our interpretation of what the law says from a policy angle. And so if any localities want to move forward with this, you would need to contact your legal counsel. Really, the purpose of this section is to kind of go over the basics of the law, go over some initial questions that we had submitted to the State Division of Legislative Services. And afterwards, we'll be going over any remaining questions that the program staff may have so that we can formally submit to the State Tax Department. So as we go through this and you have some questions, please jot them down and we can share with the tax group. That said, we'll start with some of the basics here. Okay, so SB 11 or HB 534 that incorporates SB 26 and SB 198. There were a lot of patrons who were very excited to get the bag law for Virginia. It was passed in March of 2020 in the Virginia legislative session. The governor signed this in April and is now in section 58.11745. I will make sure that Debbie shared these slides so you guys want to take a look later. That's you have that accessible. Okay, so the plastic bag law for Virginia. So any county or city by adopted ordinance are able to may impose this 5-cent tax for each disposable plastic bags provided. And this kind of addresses the questions that Lonnie had of whether it's at a fee or not. So whether or not it's provided free of charge or the store charges a fee on the bag, that 5-cent tax would be collected. So for this, to a consumer of tangible personal property by retailers in grocery stores, convenience stores, or drugstores. Formerly in our earlier NVRC meetings, we had a question come up: what about towns like Town of Vienna or Herndon? So we did ask that question to the DLS, and they said that they do not have the authority to impose the tax. It's only counties and cities. So the town should not have to have additional ordinances to follow the county code. So I just want to keep that in mind. In terms of when this tax can be effective, it would be on the first day of a calendar quarter, according to the law. So January 1, April 1, July 1, or October 1. And this tax imposed cannot be effective before January 1 of 2021. The county and city also have to submit a certified copy of their local ordinance to the state tax commissioner at least 3 months prior to the effective tax date. There are still a lot of remaining questions about this new bag law, and we're going to get to some of those questions in a bit. Okay, so now this plastic bag law is a 5-cent fee for each disposable plastic bag. This law does not mention paper bags, and that's kind of the one difference from Virginia's bag law and the district's bag law, and maybe some other states and cities. The district, as we just heard from Lillian, it includes the 5-cent fee for paper bags. So it's not the case for Virginia according to this law. The plastic bags, we have some exemptions here in our state as well, and the ones that are covered in the law are durable plastic bags intended for reuse, at least 4 mils thick. I always think about like that IKEA blue, you know, that plastic bag that you can reuse over and over again. Many grocery stores have that type of bags that they provide at a fee. Those are not counted. Plastic bags solely used for wrapping, containing, or packaging items, including an ice cream, meat, fish, poultry, produce, unwrapped bulk food items, or perishable food items to avoid damage or contamination is not counted here as well. Dry cleaning bags, plastic bags to carry medication or prescription drugs are also exempt. And finally, plastic bags that are sold in packages for garbage, pet waste, and leaf removal are also exempt. So in terms of who is part of the regulated body in this law are grocery stores, convenience stores, or drugstores. And we just heard from Lillian that in DC that restaurants, delis, and other bodies are regulated, but that's not the case for Virginia. So these are the 3 regulated bodies that the law mentions. And we'll go a little bit more into some of the questions of who is defined as those categories. And the law has a section for retailer discounts, which states that beginning January 1 of 2021 and ending January 1 of 2023, retailers are allowed to retain 2 cents, and 3 cents would then be collected by the state. And beginning January 1 of 2023, retailers are allowed to retain 1 cent, and the remaining 4 cents would be collected by the state. This discount that is collected by the retailer would be accounted as a deduction when they submit their tax returns. Okay, in terms of revenue use, this money must be used for these categories: environmental cleanup, providing education programs designed to reduce environmental waste, mitigating pollution and litter, and finally, providing reusable bags to recipients of SNAP or WIC benefits. Okay, so the administration part of this tax law is where many may have questions on, and NVRC Scott is helping us take notes today during our questions and discussion portion of this webinar to submit to the state. The law states that the state tax commissioner will be collecting, administering, and enforcing this tax as they do for the retail sales and use tax. Questions remain on who will be doing that education and outreach of this tax if the locality chooses to do this. We just heard from Lillian that one of the biggest keys to success of doing this is a really strong education and outreach plan. So there's some questions on who's going to be doing that work. In terms of how the revenue would go back to the locality is after the retailer takes their discount and after the state reimburses their direct costs to collect, administer, and enforce this tax, then it would go to the county or city after end of each month for when the tax is remitted. One key factor this law states is that the tax commissioner shall develop and make publicly available guidelines implementing the provisions of this article. And a public comment period will also need to follow after the state releases those guidelines. The NVRC Policy Committee, we have been monitoring this law and have been asking for those guidelines to be published because, again, there are some questions that remain before ordinances are drafted. Unfortunately, these guidelines have not yet been published by the state, and we've heard through the grapevines that the Virginia tax may not be publishing the guidelines until locality passes an ordinance to implement the bag tax. So I think we might need a canary in the coal mine here. So a list of questions related to implementation have been gathered through the recent waste board meetings through NVRC. Senator Evans' staff actually helped us in sharing some of our first iteration of questions to the State Division of Legislative Services, which we'll go over in the next slide, and some of their answers from a legal perspective. And if you have other questions to add on to these, please let us know. Again, our plan is to share some of these questions to the tax folks to get more guidance. Okay, so here's some of the questions localities have gathered. Are home improvement stores included as convenience stores in that definition? For example, a Home Depot, Lowe's, or Ace Hardware. Are farmers markets part of a grocery store? That's not really defined in the law. For festivals and events, would temporary vendors that sell items that grocery stores or convenience stores sell apply for this tax? And finally, our household goods store part of the convenience store definition, like a Target, Walmart, or Home Goods kind of thing. The Division of Legislative Services wrote back to us and said this would be up to the locality or by regulation, the tax department, and if challenged, a court. So SB 11 really leaves out a lot of answers to many of these questions, which means it is up to the city or county adopting this ordinance or if challenged by court, but the Department of Tax may choose to define by regulation in which case those definitions would control. So we're kind of in this waiting period of who would really be defined. What about smaller boutiques like a thrift store or jewelry store? Are they considered a convenience store? They wrote back that this seems unlikely, but would be up to the locality or by regulation, the tax department if challenged by court, because seasonal and temporary businesses apply. They also said, you know, again, this would be up to the locality or by regulation by tax department if challenged by court, but they don't really see the reason why the law would prevent a local ordinance from including seasonal or temporary businesses. And finally, if a business that is selling produce on a mobile truck, like a food truck, we've seen some of this, I think, in food desert areas across the country, do they qualify as a grocery store? Their answer was, my guess is not, but it's arguable both ways based on the definition of a grocery store from another title. Still, it would be again up to the locality if put into ordinance, or by tax department if challenged by court. There were some other questions from the department that we sent to the Division Legislative Services. Will the state excuse me, issue the penalty for non-compliance? We saw in DC's presentation they had a schedule, a penalty schedule. What is the penalty schedule? Will the state have a hotline for violators such as DC? Will the state be the ones providing the education and outreach to the regulated communities prior to the effective date? Or is that on the locality, since the law states that there's some question of who's going to do the work again, because the law says the tax commissioner shall collect, administer, and enforce this tax. And their response back was that the legislation does not require, authorize, or prohibit this, and thus it is a question of policy for the tax department to answer. So we're going to be going back to them to ask for additional guidelines. So we have also collected some other questions from other waste board members. How is the point of sale transaction going to be recorded or documented? Is it similar to the sales tax? Who conducts enforcement? How is it going to be performed? How will the taxes be reimbursed to the local government? And what frequency, is it monthly or quarterly? And will the any facts transfer from the state to the local governments clearly identify the tax as bag tax receipts or something similar? So there's a lot of these questions that still remain that we have been trying to capture. That's kind of the really basics of this law that as we know from the program staff from the localities, we're going to be submitting some of these questions again to the tax department for more clarity as we get prepared to start drafting our local ordinances. With that, I'll open it up for additional questions and discussion. Okay.
Thank you, Helen. I'm trying to see if there are any questions that you didn't respond to. I know Lonnie had a question about places like Lidl or Aldi that already have prices for their bags. And I guess this is kind of to both you and to Lillian. Maybe Lillian, what they've done in DC and what that might mean.
Sure. So when it comes to businesses like Aldi that had previously already instituted a fee on their bags, they are still here in DC. They are required to remit either 3 or 4 cents of that fee, right? And they are at least 5 cents of whatever they charge has to be its own specific line item as the DC bag fee on the receipt, right? So it's up to a business if they want to charge more, you know, but they have to specify 5 cents and remit either 3 or 4 of those cents to the fund.
And from Virginia side, based on how the law is stated, as it says, whether or not provided free of charge, I think it would be similar to what Lilia had just described.
Okay. And then Sonia had asked, does the Virginia, and I think you answered this, but you might want to clarify, does the Virginia law only allow localities to implement a bag fee, or does it allow them to pass other measures like foam bans, et cetera?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So SB 11 is specifically about plastic bags. In Virginia, the state has something what we call the Dillon rule, and we need to have the authority from the state to pass certain ordinances such as plastic bags. In terms of foam, styrofoam, polystyrene, expanded polystyrene bill was actually introduced. I think it's HB 533. It was passed by House and Senate of the 2020 legislative session. However, the law states, and it was also signed by the governor, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but it does say that it must be reenacted in the 2021 Virginia General Assembly.
Correct.
Great. And then Monica has a question. And Monica, do you want to just ask your question if you're on there?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. First of all, I'd like to thank both Lillian and Helen for doing such an extraordinary job this morning, getting all this information out. There's a lot to digest, and it's taking us a long time to get our heads around it. So I just wanted to say thank you to you both, and to you, Debbie, for putting this together. This has been very, very informative. Question to you, Helen and Lillian. While this webinar is primarily aimed at those of us in solid waste, many localities have separate stormwater programs. Are these programs being included in these discussions? And if not, shouldn't we be sharing that information in developing ordinances together? I know here in the city of Manassas, I have my own solid waste code, and stormwater will have something separate. And I think we should, consider developing those ordinances together if we have to do them locally.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Monica. And I think really it might be up to each individual locality, because just based on maybe the size of your county or city, or just the way your organization is structured, you might want to consult and work closely with them on the drafting of the ordinance. I would also like to mention that in our NVRC meetings, we have also discussed the possibility of looking at drafting an ordinance together, kind of as a Northern Virginia area, because you maybe want, when you go from the city of Alexandria to Arlington County or Falls Church or wherever, you kind of want to have a similar messaging to the regulated body, so that there's not too much confusion, especially when there's regional chains and things like that. So I think there would also be some benefit in working together as a group on drafting that ordinance together.
And I wanted just to throw in, this is Debbie, that we are also looking at doing a joint litter initiative with both waste board members and some of our litter and stormwater folks in Northern Virginia. So that's another opportunity there. And if we don't have any more questions in the chat, and I know that this was a lot of information for people to focus on, and we're at the top of the hour. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating. We recorded this, which will be made available, and I'm hoping, Lillian and Helen, that we can share your slides with the participants as well. Great. And let's, on behalf of everybody, thank you guys, thank you so much for this. And Monica, thank you so much for coordinating, and Scott for taking notes. We'll try to circle back, and if things come to you, feel free to reach out to me or the other folks related to this, so that we can work together to have some great comments to get some clarity on the new law. Thank you all again, and I think we're going to end it here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.